We did touch on Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's appointment as Manchester United's full-time manager on a 3-year contract. Want to go a little bit deeper into that now with the Independent's chief football correspondent, Miguel Delaney. Evening, Miguel.
Evening.
Was this a done deal ever since the turnaround against Paris Saint-Germain?
From even before that, I'd heard basically that there was just too much momentum behind it. Even in terms of other targets, the feeling was always, I think from quite early February, Pochettino it was going to be very, very difficult to get. And just so everything kind of came together for Solskjaer to get the job. Well, maybe the Paris Saint-Germain, the kind of, not so much the confirmation, but maybe the kind of the game that basically proved to them that they were making the right decision. Although it shouldn't be overlooked that when he was appointed, it's genuinely true that United had no intention, sorry, when he was appointed as caretaker, United had no intention of giving him the job full time. But he's changed a lot of minds to the point that since February, it's basically been virtually certain.
We hear all the time about Manchester United being the biggest football club in the world, being one of the biggest jobs in the world, not just because of what happens on the pitch, but just the amount of stories that emanate from the club and just managing a club of that size. Is that a side of it that he's impressed on as well, or are other people taking on more of the responsibilities?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the one thing you have to say about ultimately in football, I suppose, that everything is decided by results. No matter what you say, no matter what you do, if you're not winning games, none of that matters. And by the same token, and you can see this maybe with Brendan Rodgers, say, at Liverpool in 2013-14, you can get away with saying anything if you're winning games. But in spite of that, I think if you look at all the different elements of the job, he's basically done it as well as he could. There's basically been no needless problems in the way there was with Jose Mourinho so often, particularly, I suppose, in terms of the tone around the club. And I know that instigated by Louis van Gaal maybe over the last few days, there's even been this debate over whether Solskjaer actually plays attacking football. But I think that's almost the point, because even in some of those games he's been counter-attacking, it's been counter-attacking with a properly exciting angle to it, because it's not just been like, say, Mourinho's performance against Liverpool in October 2017, where there was like a 50-yard gap between 10 players and Romelu Lukaku. It's been, you can see proper structure and cohesion to their counter-attacking, and even that has had a thrill about it. So I think that's what's key. It's not just as simple as putting smiles on faces, but he's handled every different element of the job well. And I suppose, the one big question about him was maybe in terms of his experience taking over a big club, as you mentioned. But that's why everyone's saying that feeling has been so important. Similarly, the other coaches, Carrick and McKenna, that he's delegated well to them. And they've almost been, actually to a modern degree, what we heard about Martin O'Neill at his best with Ireland and Celtic, where O'Neill trusted his training ground coaches to such an extent that they would almost be his database from which he'd make team decisions on. And that sounds similar with Solskjaer now.
You mentioned there that there was no intention to give Solskjaer the job when he was originally brought in as a caretaker, and that Mauricio Pochettino was going to be an incredibly complicated deal to get done. In that initial month, though, after Solskjaer came in, did Manchester United make many soundings towards Pochettino or anybody else about becoming the permanent manager? Yeah,
even by mid-January, and which was actually, of course, just before United played Tottenham and beat them, in probably what was actually maybe Solskjaer's most fortunate game, even ahead of PSG, but it was symbolic in that sense. They were still very determined to have a proper go at getting Pochettino. And from what I heard at the time, basically, Pochettino was far and away the number one choice, like by a significant distance. He was basically seen as almost the anointed one. But Solskjaer quickly changed that to complement maybe change circumstances with Spurs as well.
What are the goals then for Solskjaer over the next 3 years? Because when Mourinho came in, it was clear that there was an expectation he would turn them back into a title-winning side, and they finished second last season without ever getting anywhere near Manchester City. For some reason, it doesn't feel as though there's quite as much pressure on Solskjaer to get them contending for a title even next season.
Right now, yes, but and I think that's what's going to be the really interesting thing about this job now, because right now, and even if they don't finish top four this season and they don't win the Champions League, so don't return there, you'll get a pass because of the nature of the season, the kind of feel-good aspect, although there will be an element of a missed opportunity. But I think that will completely change from from basically when he returns for pre-season in the summer, because then it's a completely different job. It's no longer coming in to rescue what was a really grim situation at United. It's a clean slate, and it's about basically putting his own stamp on it now. And I think, I'd say next season probably expected to finish in the top four, And because of the kind of the general way these things go, maybe the expectation that he'll need a season to get in his own men and put his own, and maybe shape the team to his own design, they'll be given a bit of a pass for that. But I think from the following season, which would be what? Geez, I'm losing track. 2020, 21. Christ, there'll be real expectation and pressure to win a league, because that's with the resources United have. That's what they should be.
You mentioned Mike Phelan there and his importance. He wasn't mentioned in this statement from Manchester United as to whether he would stay on. I presume the intention is that he will stay on. It seems as though he's been a hugely important figure over the last few months.
Yeah, I think it came up in Solskjaer's press conference, but the entire staff is that he has now is staying on. So that will continue. The structure will take place. And you never know. But the one thing I keep thinking about this, basically, because of the way everything's gone, and even in spite of the defeat in the last two matches after PSG, which does hint maybe at the danger of how this could go, it was impossible not to give him the job out of that. But at the same time, it's equally impossible. I think, why didn't they just wait a bit? Because it is very. It all feels so good now, despite the last two results. But that can so quickly change in the space of a month. If he goes out against Barcelona and they don't finish in the top four after having failed to win the FA Cup.
Yeah.
But I think there is probably a tangible reason for that. And it points to actually bigger problems at United, which is they need to start planning for the summer. But and to do that, they basically need some football authority there. They don't have a director of football, which they want to appoint. So they essentially need to have a manager in place. And I do think that has fed into maybe the speed of this decision.
So is there a sense that Solskjaer would be quite open to a director of football?
Yeah, well, I think when he took on the job, he knew the score. Whereas Mourinho was known to be against that, and I think it was one of the reasons actually Mourinho was eventually sacked, or one of the main reasons. Obviously, the results, general vibe was so bad. That was almost the final straw. He was written to a director of football, but Solskjaer, he's been made aware what the club wants to do. He's in tune with it. Although from everything I hear, that they still haven't specified exactly what the director of football role would be, and it looks like there mightn't even be an appointment in 2019. So with that in mind, there's actually maybe that bit more logic that Solskjaer's been appointed now, so he can properly prepare for the summer. Even though, looking from the outside, you would think maybe they should have just waited a little bit.
Yeah, you talk about the pressure there of turning back into a top four side and a championship contending side. A side as well that can attract the best players in the world, and there's going to be an awful lot of attention on how much money they spend, how much money will be available, and who they're going to target over the summer. I guess Solskjaer can properly start thinking about that now. Any indications from what you're hearing around United as to what sort of transfer kitty he's going to have?
Well, Woodward knows that this kind of is almost a decision he has to get right. So from everything we've heard from the outside, basically, or from inside the club, is that he's going to give Solskjaer whatever it takes to get it right. And this could be another summer of big expenditure, but maybe not big expenditure in the way that we've almost a kind of a lazy big expenditure we've become accustomed to at United, where they just go out and sign kind of big names, with the Sanchez case being the most prominent example of that. Although from what I hear, they're going to try and get Sanchez off the wage bill this summer, although whether there be too many takers is another issue. But there's two primary targets, because they want to give pace in the right wing. So that's Jadon Sancho. And I've heard they and Paris Saint-Germain have already made an inquiry for Rafael Varane at Real Madrid, who United have been interested in for some time. Previously, Madrid have had no interest in doing business. I think it was something that was mentioned last summer with all the talk of Mourinho wanting to bring a centre-half. But because Madrid want to initiate such an overhaul of their own this summer, and there's talk of a £500 million expenditure with Hazard and Mbappe, and maybe even Pogba coming in, although I don't think United will sell Pogba. But I was talking to someone who knows Madrid well this morning, they were saying all bets are off with Madrid this summer because of the extent of what they want to do. So Varane could, for once, be available. But if Sancho and Varane would both be, that would come to 200 million. Beyond that, I think they want a few other. Well, what Solskjaer wants to do is basically have a young, pacey side with a bit of backbone. There's talk of Wan-Bissaka at Palace and even Hudson-Odoi at Chelsea. Although I can't see Chelsea selling him this summer. Yeah,
you'd imagine as well they'd be after a central midfielder.
Yeah, well, actually, that hasn't come up as much. Although you from what I've heard, in fact, I haven't heard any distinctive targets. I mean, Cruz has been thrown around a bit, but I'm not sure they go back in for him. Of course, Bale has actually. I think Bale will be offered to them, but United don't have the interest they had in him that they would have had 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And from what I've heard as well, they've no interest in Coutinho right now either.
And the other part of it then is trying to tie down players to long-term contracts. David De Gea, probably the most pressing, and when you talk about Real Madrid spending up on 500 million, maybe he's back on the radar again. And also Marcus Rashford, who's been linked with a move to Spain today. Yeah,
but I think Barcelona, I know for a fact, have been very interested in Rashford and sought meetings with his people. Real Madrid have more tentative interest. I still, given how much the situation has improved, and how happy he'd be there, I couldn't see him moving on. De Gea is a more interesting case. He wants to be made the best paid player of the club, which he probably should be. If you look at his performance over the last half decade, he shouldn't be paid less than Alexis Sanchez. But part of that as well, I think, is the fees his agent would require for such a contract, which United are balking at a bit at the moment. But then, of course, his agent is George Mendes, and he's had such a strong relationship with United over the past few years. They have lent him a lot to get a fair few deals through. So, I mean, your gut would still say they'll eventually do it, especially because of how important De Gea is as maybe the best goalkeeper in the world, and particularly the best suited to what United are as a team right now.
Some of the older players then, and if you're talking about wage bill and obviously trying to get rid of Alexis Sanchez, is probably going to be a difficult enough task, and they'll probably end up in a situation where they're still paying him a couple of $100,000 a week, even if they do get rid of him to somebody else to take on the lump sum of his contract. Players like Juan Mata, Ander Herrera, guys like that he's going to have to make a decision about over the next 2 or 3 months.
Well, I mean, actually, with Herrera could be the other way because PSG are interested in him. Again, I think that he's another that could stay. Mata, he's one of those players. I mean, he's been kind of good at United, but hasn't really kind of fully worked out. And you could imagine if they do want to kind of change the wage bill around a bit and make a proper play this summer, he could be one to move on. But the Sanchez case is very interesting because even previous suitors of Sanchez, like when he was at Arsenal for so long, the two clubs you always heard in for him were PSG and Man City, and obviously both of those have no interest now.
Yeah. What about Molde? They just got their £7 million and they're happy out.
Yeah, he's one of their favourite sons. He is their favourite son. If it all goes wrong, they'll gladly have him back. So he leaves there with plenty of grace.
The other side of this, I guess, is Mauricio Pochettino, who has seen the two jobs he's been so strongly linked with taken up, with Zinedine Zidane returning to Real Madrid and now Ole Gunnar Solskjaer getting the Manchester United job. We're never going to publicly see any disappointment from Pochettino, but a pretty stark reminder to him that when these chances come up, they don't come up too often, that maybe next time he's going to have to take it.
Actually, I'm not sure I'd say that with Madrid at United these days. I mean, in fact, from everything we heard from Spurs or from Pochettino's camp, is that when it seemed he might have a decision to make around January, whether to leave Spurs and whether that be from Madrid or United, one of the things is people were saying, well, the United job is one that actually is attractive because it doesn't come up that often. Madrid comes around so often. And even as successful as Zidane has been there, what he basically did was kind of keep a very, very good squad ticking over, whereas now he has a completely different challenge in that he has to oversee an overhaul and maybe put his own stamp on a team in a different way. So given Madrid, things could drastically change there. And United have actually become a bit more Madrid-like in the days since Rig. Okay, they're not quite as trigger happy with managers, but it's changed so much more. But I think it's an interesting one with Pochettino because it takes actually, I mean, for most people that would be a lovely problem to have, basically, to choose between a club where you're already doing a great job and taking on the greater things, or two of the biggest names in world football. Whereas I think it would have been a difficult decision for him to maybe wrench himself away from Spurs. And one of the things that came up around all this discussion in January was actually whether Pochettino himself quite had the wherewithal is maybe the wrong word, whether he quite had the will to actually leave Spurs in that way. And I think that would have been a very, very difficult decision for him. And so it's taken that out of his hand and allows him to kind of keep on at Spurs. And actually, I think that is healthier for football as a whole, because I think, especially with the way modern football is going, with the concentration of resources at all the super clubs. And just when Spurs look to be getting to a certain level, for them to be but for them to have the most important figure at the club taken away from them, so that they're completely diluted. So it just goes to another one of the richest clubs. It would have been taking a bit of the necessary variety from top level football at the moment, because ultimately, as impressive as everything the Spurs are doing right now with the stadium, with the promotion of young players, they are where they are because of Pochettino.
Good stuff, Miguel. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers, yeah.